The airport was the kind of place that swallowed people whole. Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International moved like a living organism on a Friday afternoon. Thousands of bodies flowing through corridors, rolling luggage clicking against polished floors, announcements bleeding into one another until the words dissolved into shapeless sound. Gate B, 24 was no different. Rows of plastic seats filled with the exhausted, the impatient, the business travelers tapping furiously at laptops, families corralling children who had long since abandoned the concept of sitting still. I stood at the edge of the gate holding 2 bottles of water, a bag of pretzels, and a receipt for the most expensive pre-flight snack combo I had ever purchased, scanning the crowd for my wife. I found her exactly where I had left her, in the corner seat nearest the window, her navy maternity dress pulled softly around her, one hand resting on the curve of her belly with the unconscious tenderness that had become her default gesture over the last 8 months. Her eyes were closed. Her head was tilted back at just the angle that told me she wasn't sleeping, just retreating, pulling herself inward to some quieter place where airport noise and third trimester exhaustion couldn't fully reach her. Her name was Maya. Dr. Maya Renee Collins, OBGYN, board certified, 8 months and 3 weeks pregnant with our daughter, who we had already named Lily before she was born because Maya said she needed to call her something real during the hard nights. Maya had just spent 4 days at a maternal fetal medicine conference in Atlanta, presenting research she had spent 2 years building. Research on reducing mortality rates in high-risk pregnancies, specifically placenta previa cases, which was also, with a particular cruelty the universe seemed to enjoy, exactly what she herself had been diagnosed with at 28 weeks. She had not told her colleagues about the diagnosis. She had stood at that podium and delivered that presentation and answered every question with the steady, measured confidence that had defined her entire career. And then she had walked off the stage, found a quiet bathroom stall, sat down on a closed toilet lid, and cried for exactly 4 minutes before washing her face, reapplying her lipstick, and going back out to the reception. She had told me all of this on the phone the night before, her voice soft and a little ragged at the edges. I had booked her the first-class window seat 6 weeks in advance. Not because we routinely flew first class. We didn't, not on a physician's salary still weighted with student loan payments, but because her obstetrician, Dr. Patricia Huang, had been specific. Window seat, minimum pressure on the abdomen from aisle traffic, reduced risk of being jostled during turbulence, easy access for the flight crew in the event of an emergency. Maya had the medical alert bracelet on her left wrist, engraved in small, precise letters. High-risk pregnancy, placenta previa, emergency contact Dr. P. Huang. The bracelet had been Dr. Huang's idea too. Maya had resisted it for 2 weeks before quietly putting it on one morning and not mentioning it again. I sat down beside her and pressed one of the water bottles gently into her hand. She opened her eyes. "You were gone 11 minutes, she said. The line was catastrophic. "Everything okay?" "Everything is perfect," I said, and I meant it in the way you mean things when you are aware, with a clarity that sneaks up on you in ordinary moments, that the person beside you is your entire world compressed into human form. She smiled and leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat like that until the boarding announcement came. First class and premium passengers, Group 1, and I helped her to her feet with the careful deliberateness she pretended to find unnecessary and secretly relied on, and we moved toward the jet bridge with our carry-on, her boarding pass showing 2A, window, exactly as ordered. The first-class cabin of the Delta flight to Los Angeles was small and elegant in the way domestic first class tries to be. Wide leather seats, extra legroom, the particular hush that money purchases even before takeoff. Maya settled into 2A with a slow exhale that contained the accumulated weight of 4 days of conferences and 3 trimesters of high-risk pregnancy, and I lifted our shared carry-on into the overhead bin and tucked her medical bag under the seat in front of her, and for approximately 4 minutes, everything was exactly as it should have been. Then the coral blazer appeared. She came down the aisle the way certain people enter rooms, with the aggressive forward momentum of someone who has decided in advance that whatever is in her way is an inconvenience rather than a person. I noticed her before Maya did. 50-something, bleached blonde hair lacquered into a shape that had not moved through an entire terminal worth of recirculated air, large gold jewelry at the ears and wrists, oversized designer sunglasses pushed up on her head with the authority of a crown. The coral blazer was stiff and bright and somehow combative, worn over white capri pants that were already pulling in ways she would not have appreciated being told about. She had a rolling carry-on that she was pulling behind her with one hand and a large Louis Vuitton tote over the other arm, and she was looking at the seat numbers the way someone looks when they have already decided the answer is going to be wrong. She stopped at row 2. She looked at my wife. She looked at the seat number. She looked back at my wife. And then she said, loud enough that the couple in row 1 turned around, "Excuse me, you're in my seat." Maya opened her eyes slowly. "I'm sorry. This seat." The woman pointed. Not a gesture, a declaration. 2A. That's my seat. You need to move. Maya looked down at her boarding pass, which was in her hand, which clearly read 2A. "I have 2A, she said, with the patient tone she used with residents who had made a confident mistake. "You might want to double-check yours." The woman did not double-check hers. What she did instead was set her jaw at an angle I would come to think of as load-bearing. The jaw of someone who has never lost a public argument because they have never permitted one to conclude without their victory, and she said, "I fly this route every single month. I am a gold medallion member. I always have the window seat in row 2. I don't know how you ended up in it, but I need you to move. Now." The word "now" landed like something thrown. I stood up. "Her boarding pass says 2A. I watched her receive it at check-in 6 weeks ago. There's been no mistake." The woman looked at me the way people look at things that have appeared in their peripheral vision and have not yet earned the right to speak. "I wasn't talking to you. You're talking to my pregnant wife. I can see that she's pregnant." A pause. A survey. The particular cruelty of someone cataloging your vulnerability for future use. That doesn't change the seat assignment. Her boarding pass. "I don't care about her boarding pass." She said it cleanly, without heat, which was somehow worse than if she had shouted it. "I care about getting to my seat, which she is currently sitting in, and I'm going to need her to stand up and find another arrangement." The cabin had gone very quiet. Maya had not moved. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, one thumb moving slowly over the face of her medical alert bracelet. Not anxiously, but with the deliberate self-regulation of someone who has trained herself not to allow her body to spike under stress, because her body's stress responses were no longer entirely her own. "I'm not able to move," Maya said, quietly but with absolute clarity. "I have a high-risk pregnancy condition. This seat was specifically selected on medical advisement. I will not be standing up." The woman stared at her for a long moment, and then she reached up toward the overhead bin, toward our carry-on, and wrapped her fingers around the handle. The entire cabin seemed to inhale at once. She pulled, and that was when we heard footsteps coming from the galley, measured, unhurried, carrying the specific weight of someone who has walked this aisle 10,000 times and has never once been in a hurry because she has never once needed to be. The senior purser stepped into the row. She was tall. She was composed. And the moment her eyes moved from the woman in coral to my wife sitting in 2A, something shifted in her face. A change so small and so sudden that I almost missed it. Almost. It was recognition. Not the professional recognition of a flight attendant identifying a passenger. Something older than that. Something that looked, from where I was standing, exactly like a debt remembered. Her name, I would learn later, was Denise. Denise Arlene Whitmore. 53 years old. Born in Columbus, Georgia, raised by a single mother who cleaned hotel rooms for 22 years and never once called in sick, and who had told Denise at age 9, while braiding her hair before school with hands still red from cleaning solution, that the world would not always be fair, but that a woman's behavior was always her own choice, and she would be held to it. Denise had carried that sentence like a stone in her pocket for 44 years. She had used it to finish her business degree while waitressing double shifts. She had used it to accept her first gold status upgrade with dignity and without making it her personality. She had used it to sit through board meetings where her opinions were ignored and quarterly reviews where her salary was quietly less than her male counterparts and client calls where she was mistaken for an assistant. She had used it, in short, to remain recognizably herself through every circumstance that had tried to reshape her into something smaller or louder or more convenient. What Denise had never used it for was excusing herself. Because Denise Arlene Whitmore had done one thing in her 53 years that required no excusing, no rationalizing, no negotiation with the memory. And that was the thing she did on the afternoon of March 14th, 2 years before this flight. On a Tuesday that had begun with a client luncheon and ended with her standing on the roof of a parking garage in downtown Atlanta, looking at the city below with the careful, appraising eyes of someone doing arithmetic. She had been good at arithmetic her whole life. She had calculated the cost of everything, the mortgage after her divorce, her son Marcus's college tuition on a single income, the medical bills from her mother's last 18 months. She had balanced every ledger with the same steady hands she had watched her mother use on every problem that came through their door. But standing on that roof, she had found, for the first time, a ledger she could not balance. A weight on one side that no amount of calculation could counterbalance, because what she had put on the scale was not a problem to be solved, but a pain to be survived, and she was not certain, that Tuesday afternoon, that she possessed the surviving anymore. She had not jumped. What had happened instead was this: a woman had appeared. Not dramatically, not with running footsteps or shouted warnings. Just a woman who had walked through the stairwell door at the exact wrong moment or the exact right one, and who had looked at Denise standing at the edge and had not screamed and had not grabbed and had not called anyone, but had simply walked to the concrete ledge 2 feet away and leaned against it with the casual ease of someone who had all the time in the world, and said, "The wind is something up here, isn't it?" Denise had stared at her. The woman was younger than her, maybe 32, dark hair pinned back. She was wearing a conference lanyard over a navy blouse, and she was visibly, unmistakably pregnant, and she had looked at Denise with dark eyes that contained no pity, no performance of concern, nothing that felt like a script, just a complete and undivided attention that felt, after a year of being largely invisible, like being handed something she hadn't known she was starving for. They had talked for 40 minutes. Denise could not remember everything they said. She remembered the wind. She remembered the city laid out below them like a map of somewhere she had been trying to reach for years. She remembered the woman telling her, at one point, that she worked in obstetrics, that she spent her days at the intersection of the most dangerous and the most beautiful thing a human body could do, and that she had learned from that work that survival was not a character trait. It was a decision, and it required no justification beyond the decision itself. She remembered the woman's name, Maya. She remembered how Maya had eventually said, very gently, "Would you be willing to come inside with me?" Not commanding, not pleading, just asking, the way you ask someone if they'd like a glass of water, as though the answer didn't carry the weight of everything, even though they both knew it did. Denise had gone inside. Maya had sat with her for another 2 hours in a hospital waiting room, and had personally advocated for her with the intake team, and had followed up twice by phone in the following week, and had written a personal note to the psychiatrist she referred her to, and had done all of this without ever once making Denise feel like a project or a patient or a cause. She had made her feel like a person who mattered. Denise was in therapy now, had been for 2 years. Her son Marcus had moved back home for 6 months after that night, sleeping in his old room with the basketball trophies still on the shelf, and they had talked more in those 6 months than they had in the previous 5 years combined. She had gotten the promotion she had been passed over for twice, partly because she had stopped performing invisibility and started performing expertise. She had called her mother every Sunday morning. She had also, 3 months after that rooftop afternoon, applied for a position as a senior purser with Delta Airlines, a job she had seen posted and dismissed and returned to 4 times before applying, because her mother had told her once that the things you keep returning to are trying to tell you something. She had gotten the job. She had been flying this Atlanta to Los Angeles route for 14 months. She had never, in 14 months, seen Maya on one of her flights. Until today. Until she walked out of the first-class galley in response to the commotion in row 2 and looked past the woman in the coral blazer and saw a dark-haired woman in a navy maternity dress sitting in the window seat with her hands folded in her lap and a medical alert bracelet on her left wrist and the exact same quality of attention in her eyes. That complete, undivided, "You are the only person I'm looking at" attention, and felt something in her chest crack open like a window in a sealed room. Maya had not recognized her yet. She was focused on the woman demanding her seat. She was doing what Denise had watched her do on that rooftop, staying steady, staying measured, refusing to let the loudest voice in the room determine the temperature. Denise put her hand on the overhead bin door and closed it. She looked at the woman in coral. She said, "Ma'am, step away from that bag. Right now." The woman in coral did not step away immediately. People like her rarely did. Denise had been in this cabin long enough to know the taxonomy of difficult passengers the way a naturalist knows terrain. The blustering business traveler who folds the moment you use his name. The anxious first-time flyer whose aggression is really terror in a blazer. The genuinely entitled who have been accommodated so many times that resistance genuinely confuses them. As though the laws of physics have temporarily malfunctioned. This woman was the last category. She turned to Denise with the expression of someone who has just been interrupted mid-sentence by the waiter instead of the manager, and said, "I'm sorry, but this doesn't involve you. I need to speak with whoever is in charge of this cabin." "That's me," Denise said. "I'm the senior purser. I am in charge of this cabin. So you are speaking with me." A recalibration happened behind the woman's eyes. "Fine. Then you can help me. This passenger," a gesture toward Maya that managed to be both dismissive and accusatory, "is sitting in my seat. 2A. I need her relocated." Denise did not look at her boarding pass. She looked at the woman. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" The woman produced it from her tote with the impatient efficiency of someone who has already won this argument in their head. Denise took it. "Read it." Looked up. "You're in 2B, ma'am. The aisle seat." A silence. That's not right. I always have the window seat on this route." "Your boarding pass shows 2B. Then there's been a mistake made by your check-in staff, which is a Delta problem, not my problem, and I would like it corrected." Denise's voice did not change temperature. "The seat assignment on your boarding pass is the seat assignment you purchased. 2A was booked 6 weeks ago by this passenger." A small, deliberate pause. "The seat directly beside you." The woman's face cycled through several expressions quickly. Surprise, recalculation, the specific fury of someone who has realized they have been arguing with the wrong premise but is not yet willing to admit it publicly. "I don't care when it was booked. I'm telling you I need the window seat. I have medical. I have a back condition." "I understand. If you'd like to speak with me about a medical accommodation, I'm happy to do that in the galley privately. What I'm not going to do is ask this passenger to vacate a seat she booked on medical advisement for a high-risk pregnancy so that you can have a window view." The sentence was not unkind. It was simply irrefutable. The cabin had heard it. Every passenger in first class had heard it. The couple in row 1 had stopped pretending to look at their phones. The man across the aisle in 2C had lowered his newspaper to the exact angle of someone who wants to see what happens next. The woman in coral took a different approach. She pulled out her phone. "I am a gold medallion member with 340,000 miles on this airline," she said, loud enough to address the cabin rather than Denise. "I spend over $40,000 a year on Delta flights. I have flown this exact route, Atlanta to Los Angeles, every single month for the past 3 years. I have never been treated like this. And I promise you, I will be on the phone with the CEO's office before this plane reaches cruising altitude." Denise let her finish. Then she said, "I understand you're frustrated, and I want to be transparent with you, because I think that's the respectful thing to do." She glanced, briefly, almost imperceptibly, at Maya, who was watching with quiet eyes, and then back. "The passenger in 2A is a physician who specializes in high-risk pregnancies. She is currently experiencing a high-risk pregnancy herself. That bracelet on her wrist," Denise indicated it with a small nod, "is a medical alert. The window seat was not a preference. It was prescribed, and I am not authorized to override a medical seat assignment under any circumstance, regardless of frequent flyer status." A longer silence. Something moved across the woman's face, not softening, not sympathy, but the particular tightening that happens when a person realizes the audience is no longer with them and recalibrates toward damage control. "This is ridiculous," she said, but quieter now. "I want this noted in my file." "I'll note the interaction, yes," Denise said, which was not the same thing, and they both knew it. The woman dropped into 2B with the energy of someone registering a formal protest with the universe. She snapped her seatbelt. She put her sunglasses back on her face, indoors, in a dimly lit cabin, and opened her phone with the aggressive thumb speed of someone composing a social media post. Denise turned to check on Maya, and Maya was looking at her. Really looking, the way she had on that rooftop, with that complete, gathered attention, And Denise watched it happen in real time, watched the recognition move through Maya's face like light through a window being unshaded. The conference lanyard was gone. The navy blouse had become a uniform. 2 years had changed them both in ways that were subtle and significant simultaneously. But some things didn't change. Maya's lips parted. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "Denise," she said, barely a whisper. "Hi, Dr. Collins," Denise said, and her voice was perfectly steady because she was very practiced now at choosing how to hold herself, and what she wanted to hold in this moment was everything. The rooftop, the wind, the 40 minutes, the 2 hours, the phone calls, the promotion, the Sunday mornings with her mother, Marcus's basketball trophies, every single day of the 2 years between then and now. And she wanted to hold it carefully, the way you hold something irreplaceable. "You look," Maya stopped, pressed her lips together. "Tried again. You look wonderful." "I'm good," Denise said. And then, with a weight the simple words could barely contain, "I'm really good." Maya reached out and took her hand, squeezed once, said nothing more because nothing more was needed. In the aisle seat, the woman in coral was still typing. She had no idea what she was sitting next to. She had no idea what she had just tried to take. The flight had been in the air for 47 minutes when the woman in 2B made her second mistake. The first had been the carry-on. The second was the complaint form. She had, true to her word, composed something on her phone during the first 20 minutes of flight, furiously, with the deliberate performance of someone who wants the people around them to understand that consequences are being arranged. When the in-flight Wi-Fi connected somewhere over Mississippi, she had sent it. And then, apparently unsatisfied with the slow machinery of corporate complaint channels, she had pressed the call button. Denise had been in the galley reviewing the meals service schedule with her colleague Jamie, 28 years old, 2 years on the job, still in the phase of his career where difficult passengers made him nervous, when the light came on for 2B. "I can take it," Jamie offered. "I have it," Denise said. She walked to row 2 with a small smile that was professional and warm and revealed nothing. "Can I help you?" The woman in coral had removed her sunglasses. Her eyes, without them, were smaller and tireder than her performance suggested. "Yes, I want to formally report that I was humiliated by a member of your crew in front of the entire first-class cabin. What happened to me at boarding was unacceptable, and I want to speak with whoever is above you on this aircraft. I'm the senior purser. There's no one above me in the cabin. The captain is flying the aircraft. I will relay any concerns to him that require his attention. I will determine what requires his attention." A pause. "Was there anything else?" The woman's jaw set again. "I also want to know why that woman," a gesture toward 2A, "is being given preferential treatment. She's been visited by crew members twice since boarding. Is that standard?" Denise looked at her for a moment. And then, with the quiet certainty of someone who has decided exactly how far the truth needs to travel today, she said, "The passenger in 2A is a physician specializing in high-risk pregnancies who is herself managing a high-risk pregnancy on this flight. Our crew is monitoring her as a standard medical precaution. That's not preferential treatment. That's protocol. And what's so special about her?" The words came out with a particular venom. The venom of someone who has been resisting a feeling and has finally stopped resisting it. "She doesn't look that sick to me. She looked perfectly fine telling me I was wrong at the gate." Denise went very still. It was a particular kind of stillness. Not anger. She had worked too long and too hard on the relationship between her feelings and her behavior to call what she felt in that moment anger. It was more like clarity. The arrival of a moment she had not planned for and did not need to plan for, because some moments carry their own instructions. She thought about Maya on a rooftop. She thought about what Maya had given her. Not a rescue, not a save, but a presence. A willingness to stand next to someone in the hardest place and not look away. She thought about what this woman had done instead, had looked at someone visibly fragile and visibly vulnerable and had decided, in the particular arithmetic of entitlement, that the fragility was an opportunity. She leaned down, slightly, so that the words she was about to say were for 2B and not for the cabin. "I'm going to tell you something," Denise said, her voice low and absolutely level, "that you have no obligation to do anything with. But I'm going to tell you because I think it matters that you know it." The woman blinked. The aggression in her face softened slightly into something more uncertain. 2 years ago, Denise said, I was in a very dark place. The kind of place where you stop being able to imagine a future. I was standing somewhere I shouldn't have been standing, and I had made a decision I shouldn't have made. She paused. A woman found me there. She didn't call anyone, and she didn't panic, and she didn't make it about herself. She just stayed with me and talked to me like I was a person who deserved to be talked to. She sat with me for hours after that and made sure I had what I needed to start getting better. A silence. The woman in 2B was very still now. That woman, Denise said, is in 2A. She is 8 months pregnant, and she is high risk, and she is exhausted, and she has been nothing but patient with you from the moment you approached her. And I don't say this to make you feel bad. Another pause. I say it because I think somewhere behind all of this, a small, almost imperceptible gesture at the space between them, is a person who, if she knew what she was actually doing, would make a different choice. She straightened up. The woman in 2B looked, for the first time since she had walked down the jet bridge, like herself. Not the coral blazer version. Not the gold medallion version. Just a tired woman in a seat who had made choices that morning that had led her here, and was now sitting with the weight of them. Her eyes were wet. She didn't say anything. Denise didn't ask her to. She walked back to the galley, and Jamie, who had been watching from a careful distance, looked at her with an expression she recognized as the look of someone who has just witnessed something they will carry for a long time. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything is fine," Denise said. And then she prepared Maya's meal personally. The low-sodium option Dr. Huang had cleared, with the warm tea Maya had mentioned preferring, and carried it to 2A herself, and set it down, and Maya looked up at her with those same careful, luminous eyes, and said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Denise said. Lily Rose Collins was born on a Tuesday morning in October, 7 weeks after that flight. She arrived 3 weeks early, which frightened everyone. And then she arrived completely, furiously, magnificently alive, which reminded everyone why fear and hope live so close to each other in the human heart. She weighed 6 pounds and 1 ounce and had dark hair that spiked in every direction and hands that gripped with a ferocity disproportionate to her size. The NICU team was standing by as a precaution. They were not needed. Maya, who had spent her career guiding other women through the most terrifying and beautiful passages of their lives, lay in that hospital bed in the particular stillness of someone who has just crossed a threshold they cannot fully comprehend yet, holding her daughter against her chest, and cried in a way I had never seen her cry, not with grief or pain or exhaustion, but with something beyond all of those. Something that had no adequate word in English and perhaps in any language. I called it arrival. I called it the sound a person makes when they understand, all at once, everything they have been working toward. For months after Lily was born, Maya received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope with a Columbus, Georgia return address she didn't immediately recognize. Inside was a single handwritten page, not long, not elaborate, written in the careful cursive of someone who had started over several times before settling on what they actually wanted to say. "Dr. Collins, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Denise Whitmore. We met 2 years ago at a conference in Atlanta. You helped me when I needed it more than I knew how to ask for. I have been trying to write this letter for a long time. I wanted you to know that I am good. I am actually good. I have a job I love and a son who is close to me again, and I call my mother on Sundays, and I am in therapy with a doctor who I like and trust. I am building a life that feels like mine. I don't think I would be doing any of that without what you did for me that afternoon. I also wanted to tell you something, because I think you would want to know. A few months ago, I was working a flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles. You were on it. You didn't recognize me, but I recognized you. I watched someone try to take something from you that you had every right to. Your seat, your peace, your dignity. And I was able to stand in that aisle and protect you, in some very small way, after everything you protected in me. I think about that sometimes. How things come around. How we get to pay forward what we've been given. I heard you had the baby. I hope she is healthy and wonderful, and I hope she has your eyes. With everything I have. Denise." Maya read the letter at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning while Lily was asleep in the bassinet 3 feet away, and I was making coffee, and the light was coming through the window at that particular winter angle that makes ordinary rooms look briefly sacred. She read it once. Then she set it down and sat very still. Then she picked it up and read it again. "What is it?" I asked. She looked up at me. There were tears on her face, But her expression was not sad. It was the expression of someone who has been handed evidence of something they already believed but had not been able to prove. "Do you remember the flight attendant?" she said. "From the flight home from Atlanta? The one who handled everything." "Of course. It was her," Maya said. "The woman from the parking garage. 2 years ago." I sat down. We both sat in the morning light for a while, not saying anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying more eloquently. Lily made a small sound from the bassinet, not a cry, just a noise, the conversational sound she had begun making at 4 months, as though she had things to contribute and was working on the vocabulary. Maya reached over without looking and rested her hand on the bassinet's edge, and Lily quieted, because even at 4 months she already knew the geography of her mother's presence. Maya wrote back to Denise that afternoon. She wrote 3 drafts before she was satisfied. The letter she sent was not long, a page and a half, but it contained, as far as I could tell from the one time she read portions of it aloud to me, a kind of accounting. Not of debts, because Maya did not think in those terms. An accounting of gifts, what she had received from Denise without knowing it. The faith that showing up for a stranger matters. The proof that the moments we almost don't act on are sometimes the most important ones. The reminder that other people's survival is made, in part, from our small, unremarkable decisions to stay present. She also sent a photograph of Lily, asleep, with her absurd hair and her serious expression and her tiny hands curled against her chest. On the back, Maya wrote 4 words. "She has your spirit." They met for coffee the following spring. In Atlanta, Neutral Ground, a small cafe near the hospital where Denise's mother had spent her last days and where Maya had done her residency. A coincidence that felt less like coincidence than like the world folding in on itself neatly. Maya brought Lily, who was 7 months old by then and in a phase of studying strangers with the grave, assessing attention of a very small scientist. Denise arrived in a yellow dress and sat down across from them and looked at Lily for a long time without speaking. Then she looked at Maya. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Maya said. They talked for 3 hours. They talked about the rooftop and the flight and the years between them and the years ahead. They talked about Marcus and about Lily and about the particular difficulty and grace of building a life after the moments that try to end it. They talked about what it means to be seen, really seen, in the places where you are most afraid of being seen, and what a person carries forward from that, and what it makes possible. At one point, Lily reached across the table and grabbed Denise's finger with her complete, disproportionate grip. Denise looked down at that grip. Then she looked up at Maya with an expression that contained everything she had been trying to find the language for since a rooftop in March 2 years before, and she found, as Maya had found on that October morning, that the language was insufficient, that some things are lived rather than said, that some things are held. Lily will grow up knowing this story. Not all at once. First in pieces, the way children receive the complicated truths about the world, in doses calibrated to what they can hold. She will know it first as a simple story, that her mother helped someone once, and that person helped her mother back. She will understand it later as something more intricate, a meditation on what human beings owe each other, on how the smallest acts of presence ripple forward in ways we cannot predict or trace. And later still, when she is old enough to have stood at her own impossible edges and made her own choices about how to proceed, she will understand it in the way that only experience teaches, that the world is made, in very large part, of strangers who step in, of people who show up, of women on rooftops who have all the time in the world, of flight attendants who remember, of hands that reach across tables and hold. That is what Lily will know. That is what I know. That is, finally and completely, the whole story.